Via Skype to unpack these issues is development economist and associate researcher at the University of Pretoria, Jason Musyoka. Jason, good evening to you and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jason, we hear the health minister this evening speaking about, 5 days in, it seems, the measures that have been put in place are already yielding positive results. However, we cannot rule out the possibility of the lockdown being extended, and of course we wouldn't be the first country who's fighting COVID-19 across the globe to extend and make that decision. Paint a picture for us. Should the lockdown be extended, what will South Africa's economy look like?
So at the moment now, everybody is really scrambling to try and respond humanitarianly across the world. And I've seen, there is of course the downgrade by Moodys in South Africa. The UK has been downgraded 2 days ago as well. Brazil has been in junk since 2018. But regardless of those kinds of downgrades that we've seen now, there is almost no government in the world that is much more focused on fiscal stability at this moment in time. Everybody is really scrambling to make sure that their citizens survive, especially the vulnerable, the poor and the working class around this moment in time. So the response is really humanitarian, and perhaps after we've emerged out of the humanitarian crisis that we are in now, then governments will start looking at now the implications of fiscal stability in the long haul. And so that's where the world is now, and that's where South Africa is as well, where we have seen some pointers from Treasury indicating that we need to look at going to the IMF to get some money for public health, beefing up and so on. But there is not much strategic response to these kinds of downgrades because they talk to your fiscal stability, and there is almost no government in the world now that has fiscal security at this moment in time.
Let's speak then about those downgrades and, when it is post-lockdown and post the pandemic, what impact that will have when we're trying to kickstart the economy. We see today Moodys also downgrading the state-owned entities to sub-investment grade. What type of impact will that have?
There's a significant impact that we're going to have. I did suggest elsewhere that in South Africa now, what we are dealing with, as I said, once the lockdown is over, we hope that it won't go beyond the 16th, but as you indicate, there is a very good chance because at the moment we really are waiting to see what happens by the 16th. If we've not contained, which is highly unlikely, if anything such as Italy or Spain or the US now is anything to go by, we are not going to have contained the spread by the 16th. So we are going to go further into that. Now, the implications, the economic implications are astronomous. They are significant. You are going to see significant layoffs. Keep in mind, in South Africa, we've been grappling now with 29% unemployment. We expect that to shoot. In my perspective, I think we should be looking at close to 40%. We have over half of the population, that about 55%, that is in poverty. You're going to see a rise of that. The government at the moment cannot sustain handouts or social security among the rising unemployed and those who are going to sink deeper into poverty. So these are issues that somehow immediately after the lockdown or shortly after that, we have to look at a more sustainable way of recovering the economy. Economies all over the world, and certainly in South Africa, are suggesting that we are likely to see a contraction of South Africa's economy to up to -5%. And that will take us quite deep for us to be able to climb out of there. Of course, we have seen the president indicating that we need to start implementing or thinking about structural reforms. That is going to be a second-order crisis in South Africa. Structural reforms all over the world, in the short term, they create serious social and economic crisis. Unemployment, layoffs, companies downsizing, the government downsizing as well. Only after that do you start looking or seeing some form of stability. And so we are waiting to see really the actual estimates of the impact of the pandemic, but as I've indicated, you can see the markers and the signs are that we are going into quite a deep recession, I suppose.
Of course, Jason, we've heard the president saying he'll use everything in his power to offset, an economic crisis. He's been reluctant to actually put a price tag to the measures that have been put in place to fight COVID-19 in the country. Based on what is in place, the president speaks about measures that will be rolled out gradually, but taking a look at everything that has been committed to, when it comes to small businesses, when it comes to, health, our health department, Is it enough? Has government looked at everything it possibly can to save us?
I don't think so. And part of the reason is, remember, and this is again a world problem, just as it is a problem for us in South Africa, the spread of COVID-19 has been very rapid and immediate. And so it is a scrambling from somehow to respond in an emergency situation. And that also applies on the kind of reserves that we have in South Africa. We don't have sufficient reserves. Our budget, our health budget, has been sitting at about 8.7% of GDP. It is definitely not enough. The Minister of Finance did indicate that we are going to the IMF to get some money for emergency to beef up the health sector. And so we don't have enough money at the moment to deal, one, with the humanitarian issues, of which, of course, we've seen some stakeholders come to the party. We've seen the banks coming into the party, although not as sufficient as the citizens and businesses expect and households. So government has been, in my perspective, trying to respond, and that is a commendable effort that they have made to try and close all the gaps. There has been some confusions from small businesses and who qualifies. We saw earlier today that the Department of Small Businesses is going to make available some money for spaza shops. So there has been some ongoing interventions and proposals, and I imagine that there is some money that somehow are being redirected and looking at how we can respond. But all of this, again, it will sink us into debt, of course, but we are dealing with humanitarian issues. I suppose after that we can start to look at how now we can start to line up or recover the economy from the crisis that we are deepening now.
Jason, if you can, speak to us about Section 16 of the Public Finance Management Act. From what I understand is that this would actually allow Treasury to access some emergency funds that's worth into billions of rands. This hasn't been tapped into as things stand. Why is that? And would that not assist?
Well, the problem, the key issue here, and that goes back to a point I made earlier, remember there is, because of the rapidity and the quick spread of the pandemic, not in these kinds of interventions, and we know that if you deal with small businesses or large businesses as well, you need some form of training, orientation of them to learn how to access these funds. And so there is a gap now between the availability of the funds from the government side and how exactly people are going about. And frankly, and it's not just on the one particular sector that we are looking at, but across the board, as much as money is made available by the banks, by the private sector in some way, and by government, the key question now is the mechanisms in which to access these funds. And so that is the task that we probably need to work also as quickly as we did to make available that money, so that people are not sitting in waiting for getting to understand how to access money for a month or so. But we need to also get the population to understand quickly how we can access those funds.
Absolutely.